Hello, cyber warriors. Today, our English Tech Talk series, we are going to have insights from Miss Candy Alexander. I'll just give a small introduction about Candy. So, 1983, she started as a IT security management. Started a role in IT security management, and then later on, she worked in the multiple designations. So, one thing is a president, and then security learning program manager, and then global security manager. Later on, she worked as a consultant as well and board of director at ISSA, and then currently she works as a CISO lead at Neo1. And welcome, Candy. So we would like to invite for our podcast. The first thing is I'll just give a small background about cyber voyage, Candy. Cyber Voyage is a channel, so it's a pure cyber education, cyber security education. 2021, we just started as a YouTube, and after 2021, it was zero subscribers. Now we do have a 450k cyber warriors because we always say cyber education is everyone's responsibility. We bring more cyber education, cyber people to our community, and that's what we are going to get an insights from you. The questions which I am asking with you is not the questions from my end. It is from our cyber warriors end where they need an insights from an experts and they need lots of information from an expert, but which I cannot give them. That's where I am just bringing experts like you and then giving them the information, Candy. And first of all, welcome, Candy, for our podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am so excited for participating today. Your mission is quite impressive, and I am like so supportive of cyber education. For we should never stop learning. So, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Candy. The first thing is you have like around 42 years of experience in cyber education and cyber security, Candy. Because these questions I always ask with everyone. Because if you tell us when you know cyber security, we will tell an answer 10 years back or 8 years back. But you have came into this domain 42 years back and as a cyber security professional. Now, how did you choose the cyber security as your career and how you jumped into a cyber security and which leads you to be in this field for 40 plus years? It's been like four
Yeah.
decades, Candy. So we would like to get an answer from you, Candy.
Well, thanks for like putting that right out there. Now I think I must be crazy to stay in it for so long. However, obviously, because I love it so much, it's why I'm still here. So, I must say over my career, it's never really been boring. It is exciting. It is challenging. It is dynamic in its truest sense. And how I got my start, back then, there really wasn't so much a security profession. I often speak about our profession and how it got started, and it really we're a reactive profession. And what I mean by that is I worked at a company called Digital Equipment Corporation. And if you know your computer security history, back in the 80s, Kevin Mitnick broke into digital equipment, and he and his accomplice had broken in and stolen the VAX VMS version 5 source code, which was at the time a revolutionary operating system. It was like a completely new VAX VMS. So it was really quite significant event, for the computing industry, as well as, of course, digital. So again, being a reactive profession, people at digital kind of said, okay, like you, and you go figure out what happened. And so there was, the start of cybersecurity in earnest. We always did, look to protect things to a certain degree, because let's face it, in digital, it was an engineering culture. Engineers like to experiment and, test things out. So we, tried to protect our systems from, those experiments, shall I say, that were not malicious intent. But as soon as Kevin had broken in, that was when, it was like game on. And I guess, long story short, I guess I can owe my career to Kevin. May he rest in peace. So yeah, so I really grew up with the profession. I've been very, very fortunate that way.
Thanks, Candy. So you just gave a nice example, and the 3 points you clearly mentioned: no boring, and challenging, and dynamic. Because as a human being, of course, we work on something for 15 days, 20 days, 1 month. It will be get boring after 1 month, after 2 months. We won't do it. We won't proceed it. And cyber education or cyber security is the area every day you will be keep on learning. And that is also you have just given a great example. And Kevin Mitnick has broken into your systems, and then you got to know like that's where game on. Then we are going to learn, and even though we have a protection, but how do we learn? That's where you are being in this domain for a long time. Thanks, Ms. Candy, for your insights. And for a 42 years experience, and still we are a human being. And of course, this question we would like to ask with you: what is the biggest myth or misconception about cyber security or cyber risk management? Being in a management perspective, of course, few things will frustrate you, but still, organization believes it. And what
Mhm.
is that myth that frustrates you, but the organization still believes it? And we would like to get an insight from you, Candy.
So actually, I have two answers for you. One from a personal perspective, and then one from the organizational perspective. So from a personal perspective, and I think this is what has stopped a lot of people from coming into our profession, is there's the thought and misperception that you need to be technical. You do to a certain extent. However, you need to have other traits as well. Like when I first started, you very much had to be technical, but now the diversity of specialties in our profession is like profound. You have those that are into GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, those that are security program managers, program management. You have those that are security engineers, so that's more into development of applications and the security thereof. So it is now to the point where if you are at any degree interested in our profession, there is a spot for you. It's no longer you got to be really smart and really technical. When I first started, people would say, "Oh, you've got to be like so smart," and it's like, of course, being smart is letting them think that. And then alternatively, figuring out how to learn the systems, like system support people, but then having additional skills and abilities and aptitudes for problem solving. So, and then on top of that is the desire to understand, I think, motivation. Why does somebody want to do, this act? Is it monetary? Is it for, fame? That, believe it or not, really helps to understand. So those are misperceptions from a professional individual perspective. And then from an organization perspective, perceptions is in regards to security being the Department of No. So I have forever had organizations like wouldn't tell me things, because they didn't want me to say, "Oh, you can't do that." Where, over time they got to understand I'm not going to say, "No, don't do that." I'm going to say, let's figure out what it is that exactly you need to do and how can we do it securely. So I think that we as a profession have, done a lot of work in that regard, is to, work with the business to figure out how to do things. But I think our final challenge right now with business relationships is to really support the business. So what I mean by that is a lot of times people will develop security programs and they'll say, okay, well, we need to protect from, hacking. So we need, data protection mechanisms. We need a security operations center. You go to the business with that, and they're just gonna, their eyes are gonna roll because they don't understand. A really much better example of that is when you go to executive leadership and you say, we need to get a SOC 2. And so what they're hearing is that you're costing me money. And businesses don't like you to cost them money. Businesses want to make money. So what you do is you alternatively go to the business and say to the business, in order for us to engage with more prospective clients or customers and demonstrate our ability to do so securely, if we have a SOC 2 certification, then that demonstrates that. And besides, it shortens the sales cycle because no longer do you have to fill out all those crazy questionnaires. So now you're a business enabler and you are contributing to revenue generation. So it's the same conversation. It's just put in terms that the business can understand the value of.
Thanks, Candy. You just gave a very great insights on two perspective, Candy. So one thing is the personal and one thing is the professional one. And personal end, if you are technically strong, then you can get into a cybersecurity, because that is a myth, everyone has it. And that is also, you just gave an insights on, it is not about the technicality, it is about the diversity, where we need to have a multiple skills. It is not only on the technical skills, it should be having the business management skills, it should have the punctuation, it should have the corporate responsibility, it will be having the leadership responsibilities. And you just mentioned all these things, Candy. And even for a technical engineers are there, and for a management GRC professionals are there, and for an upper management, of course, CASSP holders, CASM holders, on all the leadership qualities people will be there. And mainly you clearly mentioned on the problem solving part, because when you know about the problem, because all the organization people who cares about the solutions, it is not about the problem. I have a team, they only focus on the problem, who cares? But I have a team, they focus on problem solving, they are giving us the solutions to make sure that we are safe. That's where we are going to take them. So that is the very great insights from you for a problem solving, Candy. And motivation, because as a good quality, so for 10 years I worked with the different leaders, and they everyone are motivated, Candy. I'm truly agree with that, because when as a human we fed up on few things, even in the personal side or with the business side. And when we are working with other person, their moral support or their motivation help us to overcome it. And for a leadership quality, motivation is a very good thing, that is also you mentioned. But all these things, few of them have a challenge, but they don't believe this is all the real important and real thing that will lead us in a different thing. And the second thing, the professional side, most of the companies that they don't focus on security itself. So they say, if we need a compliance, why do we need it? So they only focus on revenue part. And it was a great insights, Candy. And now other question is stock market cyber risk, because when I was looking at your background, it was all about the stock market cyber risk. But what about the financial fluctuations, and what could be the key indicators as a CISOs you will predict for our future? Let's say 10 to 20 or 30 years back, if you look at stock market, any issues or any vulnerabilities or any exploitation systems or any APT groups are there, but it's less. But now people are investing on stock markets, and as a CISOs, you can advise for other people, where we need to be in such a trends, we need to predict these kind of future attacks to make sure there should not be any risk levels on the stock market part itself, Candy. So we need an insights from you, Candy.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever had that asked of me before, but I think, moving forward, and when we're looking at the market, it's really come to be that there's an expectation now, right? There's a baseline expectation for business that you are going to be able to, protect your organization, the proprietary information, in to that point, though, however, I'm going to counter myself and say that interesting enough, here in the States, we had that Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. Now, that had a significant impact on the business operations, where they went down for a very long time, to the point where they felt obligated to pay the ransom in order to get business back operating. So that being said, though, however, it really didn't affect them as a business. So, I think at one point there's the expectation that businesses protect themselves and their reputation, but at the same time, I think, the market itself also would very much understand things happen. I think what's going to really expose some of these risks going forward, both positively and negatively, would be of course, we wouldn't have a cybersecurity conversation without mentioning artificial intelligence. So, that's a two-sided coin as well, where, the bad guys, the malicious threat actors, they're using that absolutely, and have been for some time. Unfortunately, we, on the other side of that coin, are only starting to really embrace that as a tool for protection of our environments. And that, of course, being, the trade industry, being, the different markets around the world, they have a higher level of need and risk. Of course, you follow the money and you follow the risk, and therefore you follow higher levels of protection. So I think when I think about the future in general, again, I've been in this a long time. I'm not bored yet. I think it's going to be really interesting. And I think we just need to remember the basics of cybersecurity. The confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability. It's really simple. It is that simple. What degree of that triad do you need for fill in the blank? And when we come to looking at AI and the adoption of AI, of course, a lot of it, that same model applies. Confidentiality. Is the data that I'm feeding into the AI model, is that all of a sudden turning public? So there's confidentiality. Integrity. Am I able to have the traceability of how that decision was made from Gen AI or not? So I don't know if it's of integrity, that response. And then availability, right? If I come to really lean on AI, am I always going to be able to rely on the availability of the systems in regards to the AI? So no matter what, it really does come down to those simple principles of cybersecurity.
Thanks, Candy. So, three things we have just taken from your insights. One thing is business, and second thing is the investment, and third thing is remember your basics. So, whatever it is, whatever the future attacks or past attacks or present attacks comes in, and remember the basics. That's where we can protect all our assets. And now, following questions on the same topic, because as a board member, when we look at your LinkedIn, so you are the board member, of course. When you might have a situation, you are advising your executives. At that point, you were expecting something about cyber risk, but you are expecting someone should ask these questions from the board members or from the board executives, but they have never asked for. Is there any situation, like when you are giving an advice to an executive that you are going to build this process, or we are going to build a or else onboarding a tool or technology or any kind of people process or anything that we are going to implement in your organization, but you are expecting some inputs from your the peers, but you have not get anything? So is there any other situation that you have faced, Ken?
Well, you have to recognize as well, right? And I advocate for this quite frequently, is that yes, I absolutely understand and agree that board of directors, they have responsibility, right? They have a fiduciary responsibility, and part of that fiduciary responsibility does include the protection of the company, right? And so I think that the conversations and the questions should be completely different and again aligned with the business. So when you have those conversations with the organizations, you really need to, again, back to basics, know your audience, right? When you give a presentation, for example, this conversation here, it's geared towards educating your listeners, right? Whereas, so I'm being extremely explicit, and so the board of directors, I fully expect them to have different questions, like, what is the probability of having some type of cyber attack? So again, the level of probability, what would be the potential cost? What is the investment that we're making into the cybersecurity program to mitigate those risks? So it's going to be those types of conversations. That would be tightly connected to an audit committee. Boards of directors have an audit committee in which they review audit results and things like that. So that goes hand in hand to the risks. So it's almost like, the audit committee would perform the assessment, and then the security officer or whoever is the security expert on the board of directors would come in and follow up with the risk mitigation and the level of investment. In other words, do we need to bring in some consultants to, resolve those issues? Is this something that can happen in-house with our, talent and staff? And then how long would it take to, get those problems addressed? So it's a very different conversation with boards of directors. I fully agree there. I think the state of New York here in the United States has a law in which they need to have someone with experience in cybersecurity on the board of directors. I think that should be adopted everywhere, in my, personal opinion, only again for the matter of making sure it's being addressed properly.
Thanks, Candy. So you mentioned about a few things is aligned with the business, because when we are giving some ideas or when we are having some discussion with the executives, of course, that should be aligned with the business. We are expecting such things from the other board of directors as well. And second thing is the probability that you clearly mentioned. And third thing is the potential cost. When you are onboarding a tool, and why you are going to onboard this tool, and what could be the potential cost? Is there any breach happened before, or is there any regulations that we need to follow, or is there any compliance requirements that we need to follow? So based on this potential cost also, we are expecting something from the peers. And about the investment, when we have a budget of $100K for a tool, and what about if it exceeds? What about the duration? So that is also we are expecting from the executives as well, Candy. And finally, you have mentioned a point like, if someone has to be in a board of directors, there should be from the cyber security background, even you adopt for it as well. Thanks for your insights, Candy. And now the complaints, because when you belongs to board member, you belongs to upper management, and you belongs to leader level as an organization. When an auditing time comes, people, they go with complaints and they'll complete the requirements and they will close these things, and they'll say, hey, we have a requirement, we have done a complaint certificate, we have a certificate, look at it, we have got a good grading systems as well. But what you suggest, and an organization must go beyond rather than complaints requirements, because even when we look at any other organization, even small scale organization, if you have a complaints requirement, they just only focus on the checklist. They don't go beyond it. And we need an input from you, what you must suggest an organization they should go beyond to make sure they are very really secure, not only for the complaints part itself, Candy.
Absolutely. So I think the important thing to recognize is that an audit or an assessment is only a snapshot in time. And we all have good days and we all have bad days. So we really need to make sure that we are in a good position all the time. So, again, and I'm sorry to go back here, but it goes back to the basic principles. Follow your standards, do self-assessments. measure, are we good, with this set of controls? Where do we have our deficiencies? So don't just rely on those audits and assessments that periodically happen, but do self-assessments regularly, making sure as well that when you go into development of systems or you adopt new systems, that you are checking for the security posture of those. Making sure that when you bring in anything new to the environment, so systems, devices, or people, that they're all aware of, what those expectations are. And, from a systems level, do they meet your baseline configurations? Let's face it, again, in all my years, have never had an organization where the environment is exactly the same from day to day. Systems become unpatched for whatever reason. You can continuously, push out patches, and for whatever reason, users may not shut down their computer, so the patch isn't applied. So it's a moving target that you always have to stay on top of and be aware of. It's funny because I remember when I first started, speaking publicly about cybersecurity, I kept saying it's know your environment. And so it's not just know your environment once, it's know it inside and out. A little side story. So I, have raised my daughter to raise horses. So I know this is going to sound terrible, but they say you don't really know your horse and the health of that horse until you feed it, until you water it, and until you clean the stall out. That way, you know everything about that horse. So you put that analogy to your computing environment, you get in front of how many devices were patched, how many are still patched, how many user accounts do you have? Do you review the access, control list? Do you look at permissions? So it's constantly doing these reviews over and over and over to make sure that everything is as you expect it to be.
Thanks, Gandhi. So, based on your insights, first thing is basic principle, because for most of the questions, of course, basic principles are the one which leads to an attack, and of course, we got a great interest from you. Second thing is follow standards. So each one has the standards, just keep following it. And third thing is the security posture. You might have a different technology, AppSec or CloudSec or application security, or it could be infrastructure security, it could be a cloud security, or it may come for the threat intelligence frameworks, or you're going to get feeds from intelligence and hunting and offensive or defensive. There may be lots of areas would be there, but based on that, do we have a security posture on each and everything? Do we have a centralized dashboard? That is also insight that we have got from your end. And then the baseline configuration. So we might have a multiple cloud assets. It could be AWS or Google or Azure. Do we have a proper key rotation steps, or do we have a proper encryption standards? So that is also the baseline configuration comes in.
Yes.
And continuous compliance. And every month are we checking on it? And let's say we have a 10,000 plus assets, and all the 10,000 plus assets, are we managing each and everything each and every month? Are we seeing those results in higher level? And that is also a great insights, Candy. And no inside out. You clearly mentioned, if something let's say you have an organization, your organization might be having 100 plus accounts, and 100 plus accounts might be having an inventory details, and those inventory details will be comes with the centralized dashboard. Those centralized dashboards will be having an user account details. All these information, if you know what you have, what that you're going to do with it, and whether are we safe, if you know such kind of things, and of course our organization will be secure. And these are all the insights that we have got. Thanks for your insights, Candy. And now, being a leader and being a human being, of course we learn lesson every day. And the first question you have answered, you keep learning each and every day. Now we would like to know a lesson from you, that you have taken a decision, but you thought that is wrong decision, but later on you the wrong decision made you, oh yeah, we have taken a right decision, it turns to be a right. Is there anything like that, or else is there any right decision turns to be a wrong? So that's where we have learned a lesson, because 42 years you have learned many lessons. We would like to know one lessons from you that it may change a disaster or it may change a posture. So which one, Candy?
So I think one story that comes to mind, and this is I think this was my second role as a chief information security officer. I knew that I needed to align with the business. I knew that. And the best way to have that happen is to meet with each of the business unit leaders. So once a quarter, I would meet with all of them, like the head of customer support and the customer product, the head of this, that, and the other. So I would meet with every one of them. And I would say to them, listen, I'm here to partner with you. Thank you for taking the time. So tell me, what is it that keeps you up at night? And they would look at me like, really puzzled. They didn't have an immediate response. And I came to realize that why am I asking them that? Right? They have no idea what, keeps them up at night from a security perspective. And that's my job. And so once I had that very, very straightforward revelation, I would meet with them and I turned the conversation around. And I said, okay, clearly this is, I got off on the wrong foot. So my apologies. But why don't you tell me what are the top 3 things that you are working on this quarter? So it just so happened that the head of customer service and relations, he announced that he was moving the call center. And by the way, the call center collected a lot of personally identifiable information. And that call center was being moved to an outsourced organization. So I was like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. So I had not known about it. Number one. Number two, I didn't have an opportunity to check their security procedures out to make sure that they were handling the data correctly and so on and so forth. So it's because I changed that conversation that I was able to understand what their objectives were. And I could contribute to not only the success of a smooth transition for that business leader, but I could also protect the organization because now I was, going to ensure that the vendor management of that outsourced call center was going to meet our security requirements. Otherwise, if I had not changed that conversation around, we would have continued probably to meet 1 or 2 more times and just not seen the value in the conversations anymore. So really need to reflect a lot on your things that aren't quite correct or your failures or a different approach that you're not getting, the success that you would anticipate. So that's what had happened is I reflected on, geez, that was awkward. That was a really awkward conversation. Maybe I should be approaching it differently. So then it hit me, stop talking about me, because it wasn't about me, it was about their business. And as soon as I did that, it became a much better journey in relationship. And of course, bad or good, I become really busy because now I was really involved with the business.
Thanks, Candy. And follow-up question on this, Candy, because when we are learning something, of course, people will say, and around everyone will say, learn from mistakes. And when our age is 10, our mistakes, they don't, anyone, if we do mistakes, people will not be considered as a mistakes because we are a kid and we are growing. And 25, when we are at a situation where we joined in a corporate environment, and when we do a mistake, and in other sectors or any sectors, when we do a mistake and 25, and they say, okay, fine, you are just new to this process or new to this technology, learn from mistakes. But when we are in an organization level, when we are in a decision maker, and we are the CISOs or CTO, when we do a mistake, whether it is something like a we expect learn from mistakes, or else we can say humans can make mistakes at any point of time?
Yes.
And is there any
Yes.
percentage in a decision makers level where when we are 25, we can tell, we will give you like, okay, 80% if you are doing mistake, and correct it to 70%, and 70 can reduce to 60%, so that the percentage will get reduced. But when we are in a decision making, is there any percentage we should be very keen about our decision making, even though if we do a mistake the impact should be very less? And is there any percentage that you can tell us, okay, 10% mistakes is fine, because that's where humans will make mistakes, but we should not make 80 to 90%, and 10% should not be impacted one? Well, is there any percentage that you can say, Candy? Or else there is no percentage at all?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I guess, you know, and I have been in a very senior capacity of being the international president of ISSA. So I was like the CEO. And I think it's a good leader that acknowledges mistakes and then redirects. But it's also important to be humble, and acknowledge, geez, I could have done better, and not shy away from that, because like you said, we are all human. We're all, learning through the journey of life. But I think one of the biggest things that, leaders can take away is not discount the counsel of those around them. And this goes back to another story when, for example, a great leader that was my initial role model was Ken Olson, who was the president of Digital Equipment Corporation. Now, this man started from a, 3-person company in a little town of Massachusetts, and it grew it to be a huge global operation. And even to his last days, Ken Olson would walk through various facilities and stop people in the hallway and ask them, how are you doing? What is your job? What are your challenges? So he was taking counsel from the people who deliver mail to the people who, wash the floors, to engineers, to everybody. And I think that probably was the most valuable lesson as a leader that I would be able to take. But it's difficult to put into practice, because you really need to have people understand that you're genuine and asking this and apply them appropriately, and make them understand, I'm responding based on your input. I appreciate your input, and not take it like they own it themselves.
Thanks, Candy. It was a valuable insights, Candy, because when people goes to the leadership level, and of course the first thing is acknowledge mistake, even though as we are human, acknowledge the mistake, because instead of acknowledging, if we are giving a justification for our mistake, it leads to another thing, so that we will lose our connects. And of course that's what leadership quality comes in. So whatever it is, just be transparent, be open, acknowledge the mistake, so that we will get another chance. But if we start giving a justification, of course the trust will, the bond will broke between the humans, because when the bond has been broken, and of course as a leadership level, it won't be a the proper bond, so that we cannot work together later on. So it was a very good insight, Candy. And be humble. So whatever it is, please, can you please give us a minute, and can you please lend us a minute? And the statement, of course that's what people comes in, because who are you to ask me a question, and can you please respond to this question? There are two different things for one question itself, and of course that you have given a very great insights, Candy. That's where the soft skills comes in. And even every human make a mistake, but depends on these qualities only, we will accept it or we will deny it. And that's what, thanks for your insights, Candy. One more question also that I'm going to ask: if you have a power, because when we work in a corporate environment, we do follow the protocols, we do follow standards, frameworks. When you have a power to remove the framework which the corporate or organization which is using, which you seems to be a, which you feel that this is outdated, we should not use it, is there anything that when you feel, whether ever you feel, if it is, what is that? So what is that framework, or what is that policy which you feel like this should not be, why we are using it?
That's an interesting question as well. Excuse me. So I'm going to make a confession. I've never followed a framework exactly to the letter, exactly, because that was never really the intent of frameworks. Perhaps PCI DSS is different, but I think when we look at the other frameworks, whether it's ISO, whether it's NIST, whether it is high trust or fill in, unless it's regulatory like GDPR, they're not meant to be absolutely prescriptive. You're supposed to take what's applicable to your organization and their guidance. That's why it's called a framework. Just like when you build a house, I used to use that analogy. When you go to build a house, you have a blueprint, and the blueprint tells you how to put up, the frame of the house, but it doesn't tell you necessarily how many lights you're going to have or where the light will be, or, all of those things. So there is room for interpretation, and I often take that liberty to do that, especially as the frameworks are wonderful. They give us the directional map to follow. But because technology evolves so quickly, it's impossible to follow a framework 100%, unless, again, it's GDPR or it's PCI DSS, where they're regulated. It's a regulated, prescriptive, approach. But other than that, I would highly advise people, whenever I meet with my clients, I look at what the business is, what's the objective of the business. If it's international, I'll say, let's look at ISO. And especially if you need to have ISO certification, because that's expensive. It's not too often I recommend that, because it's a very expensive process. I'll recommend NIST many times, and or other frameworks, and then just take from those and apply to your environment as it's warranted. And then for new technologies, just try to fit it into that framework as much as you can. It's never 100%, right? That the old 80-20% rule applies, except for, again, regulated environments.
Thanks, Candy. You perfectly told what's applicable to your business. Even there are many policies, frameworks. Of course, there will be bunch of frameworks which is for each and every industry. But what business that you are running in, and what business that you are going to take it forward, which is applicable to you, and take it forward. And it was a great insight, Candy. And have blueprints. So policy is something like a blueprints. I have a home. If I have a money, of course I can install CCTV monitor. If I can install CCTV monitor, of course I can keep some IDS or IPS for a protection purpose. And if I can keep IDS and IPS, I can install an antivirus in my laptop itself. And if I have a laptop, I can do some kind of a voice recognition systems, and I can use a CCTV recognition systems. And based on your home, based on your budget, whatever the business that you are taking it forward, then you can use it accordingly. That's what's applicable for you. And it was a great insights, Candy. And direction of map. So framework structures will give you the map, and which one should taken it forward, and that is also based on your inputs. So if a framework gives me 100 point, but those 100 points doesn't require for my business, 50 is enough, then I'll take 50. Then remaining 50 I don't want it, because that doesn't require to my business. And that is also clearly told. And objective of business, that's what you clearly mentioned. And it's been 45 minutes, Candy. Now the final question. An organization, they focus on risk, vulnerabilities, which is measured by a tools. Hey, I have a web application now, a security tool. and it shows 20 plus SQL injection, and you need to fix those 20 plus SQL injection to make sure your web applications are safe. So here the measurement comes with the web application. The same way we do have an infrastructure. So hey, your organization will be having a 10,000 plus assets. Out of 10,000, 80,000 assets, 8,000 assets are critical. Now, apart from all these tools, what are all these some unseen measurements for an organization, which it could leads to a cyber attacks, but it could give a real-time impact as well. Even though if we have a tool, that doesn't mean we are secure,
Mhm.
but we do have some unseen cyber risk which will cause a high impact to our organization. What is that, Candy?
Well, so there's not a direct answer to that, but I think it goes back to the cliche or not of people, process, and technology. So the example you just gave was very much focused and centric on the technology. Again, you got SQL injection, you've got so many instances of that, you got to mitigate and so on and so forth. But what you're also missing is the process to support that, right? And so when you go to the developers and say, listen, we've got 80 SQL injections that need to be fixed. So you need to fix it. They're going to roll their eyes and say, well, wait in line because all these features and functions have to come first. And so that's when you have to use the process, right? And talk with the people to get that fixed. So what I mean by that is in that example, I would go to the product manager or whoever owns the product, and I would talk to the CTO. And the three of us would sit down and say, listen, the probability of something happening on, that platform, that website is X amount. So let's figure out how we're going to put it into that next sprint or not. So again, I'm using the development process to inject the mitigation of that SQL injections, and I'm leveraging the appropriate level of authority in the organization to get it done. Where I am the CISO, go to the CTO who's responsible for technology, who also I'm also pulling in who's responsible to product. Because if you don't all get in the room at the same time, I'm going to go to technology and they're going to say, I can't do anything about it because it's all about product. And so if I go to product and say, we need to fix that, they're going to say, oh no, the developers are overloaded. It goes back to technology. So again, when I would work those things, I would leverage all people, process, and technology to get it done. And making sure when you're doing risk mitigation and risk conversations, it's happening at the right level. So if I go to the developers, they're going to say, it's not my job. I'm only doing what I'm told. So you just go to the appropriate authority in the organization to get that done.
Uh, Very well explained, Candy. PPT, people, process, and technology. You may have web application tools or technologies, whatever it is, but the process is there for a web application. You should do IAST, DAST, SAST, SEA, manual penetration testing. All needs to be done for a web application. That is a process. But who owns a product? That's where people comes in. And for this web application, and that guy, the person, the professional, the expert is responsible. Who takes care of all this web application? That's where people comes in. So a product owner, you clearly explained the product owner, they need to go through with all these development activities, and then they need to go with the SDLC, secure SDLC activities. They need to go with the deployment activities. They need to go with the shift left activities, and then they'll be going with the IAC, SAST, DAST, and all these activities. Then the technology comes in for the DAST technology. All these things comes in. Then that's where all PPT will goes follow. And this is what an organization should follow a process. And based on your insights, it was very clearly explained, Candy. And it's been 50 minutes,
Good.
Candy. So starting, you have explained about how you jump into a career and how you transition into a cybersecurity. You've just clearly mentioned about there is no boring in this technology and it is very challenging and dynamic. And then you just got into a myth and you have given what about the myth and a few things you have explained about the myth as well. And then the prediction of future cyber attacks on this stock market, you just gave some insights on it as well. And advising of executives, because when you are doing some advice to the executive, you are expecting something from the board of directors as well. That is also that you have mentioned. And the decision making, you have taken a decision, but it turned out to be a good or it turned out to be a bad. You have just gave a very good insights on it as well. And finally, if you have a power to remove any rules and regulations, and for that you have articulate, you have given a very good insights on that, Candy. And thanks, Candy. We have learned a lot from this session, and we will not say this is a session. We will say this is an insightful session. We can say, because our cyber warriors, few persons they are freshers, few are 5+ years of experience, few are 10+ or 20+, and based on your experience, your insights are very valuable to them. And this valuable insight session, they can take it forward for the next 20 years. And after 20 years, of course, they wanted to be as a leader, they wanted to become a cyber warrior, and they will build a product, they can create their own companies. And that's where your insights comes in, and based on your insights, they are going to be a very well equipped persons in future. And when I was saying, I don't have anyone to support, and when they are looking at our channel and we are here to support them, so this is what knowledge transfers comes. And thanks for your insights, Candy, and thank you so much for your time for us, Candy.